Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the SOM TV podcast. My name is Jason Wise. On today's episode, we are going to speak about the stark warning that is coming out from the Surgeon General that they would like to label alcoholic products, anything with alcohol, as a cancer-causing agent, similar to what maybe you would see with cigarettes or gasoline at the gas pump, things like that. On today's show, I have wine journalist Jessica Dupuy, and we are going to go over what this means and do a little bit of comparison with some other things that don't get attention for having some causality with cancer as well. Before I do that, I want to say, coming shortly to SOM TV, we have a brand new Napa Valley Vintage Report taking a look at the 2023 vintage. It's fantastic. So I want you guys to take a look at that. Go to somtv.com. We have new stuff every week and a lot there to check out, hundreds of hours of the best content in food and wine. Jessica, I really wish we were on doing a conversation about something else, frankly, not this.
I do too, but this one seems pretty important. It seems to be resonating with people quite a bit right now.
Yeah, it's a very hot topic. Before we get into the conversation, I should say, you are quite accomplished. You have written for Food and Wine Magazine. You have written for Decanter. You have written for Forbes. You have your hands and feet deeply in the wine and food world. And so naturally, you're going to be talking about something like this. It was sad that I found out that I was going to die this soon.
This quickly, and in this way.
Yeah. So I poured myself a glass of wine.
Which kind of wine? That's what matters.
Well, I'm just drinking a rosé. Very simple rosé.
Nice.
So why don't we start with you telling me what happened? What was this announcement for people who have not heard or maybe just barely heard what this was or brushed it off? What happened?
Yeah. So the Surgeon General last week put forth an advisory, enumerating a few of the reasons that they are suggesting that perhaps the alcohol industry starts to add warnings to the labels of alcohol. And my understanding is all alcohol. So that could be from beer all the way to spirits, wine, all of it. Just kind of making this warning that alcohol has an increased risk of contributing to cancer. And they also, in that advisory, listed about 8 specific cancers that they have kind of hit upon in discovering through their research that those particular cancers are at most, in the likelihood of that risk.
Yeah, I want to make sure everybody understands. I know a lot of people come to the SOM TV podcast for their health news, and I want to make sure people know neither you or I are doctors, and neither you or I are disputing the fact that alcohol, like almost every other damn thing in the world, has a causality to cancer. And I don't know if anyone listening is living in California like I am, you can't walk into a building, you can't get into a car, you can't get in an elevator without a sign that says something in this facility is known to the state of California to cause cancer. They don't tell you what it is. I mean,
something. Yeah.
Something
yeah.
does that. So I think for Californians and especially people in LA and San Francisco, it's like, okay, yeah, it's something. I'm dying right now. But I personally, when this came out, and maybe I'm just sensitive, I felt that this was targeted. I kind of felt this was a bit targeted. So we're going to get into where this came from, why it happened, why now. But before, I just want to know, what are your thoughts on, did this feel personal a little bit to you?
Well, yeah. So, personal, I have to say, I have to be careful as a journalist because I'm not supposed to have feelings. But I will say, first, I'm glad you're opening this. Yes, neither one of us are doctors or scientists. But, for me, I think the messaging on this, the timing of this just felt a little odd. And there are a couple of things, as I'm sure we're going to get into. But I think we can establish, we're going to go straight into the fact that we're parents. I was talking to my kids, and we like to joke that, from, I think, the movie Frozen, they say something like, we are all going to die. We will die one day of something. So if that's well established, certainly there are things that can help increase that probability, right, of it happening sooner rather than later. So I don't take it lightly at all when we're given information that something could be more bring death closer to us in a faster amount of time. But to me, there are some problems with how this came out and the timing of it coming out. So the reason I decided to say something about it or really just kind of throw out some facts and figures about it is because the timing in particular for the wine industry is bad, right? Because for the past couple of years, there have been an increased decline in sales, not just for wine, but all across the board for alcohol, with RTDs being a tiny exception, but we'll see, right? They seem to be doing well or better than others. And obviously, like I just saw stats today from The Economist about how the no alc or low alc, definitely more zero alc, is those drinks, those beverages are seeing a sharp rise, and they're predicted to continue to see that sharp rise. I find all of this interesting, but at the same time, how far is that decline going to happen, and what are the ways in which the industry overall can gain control of that messaging and try to turn the ship around a little bit. But when an advisory like this comes out, it's definitely like kicking a dog while it's down. You know what I mean? Like it just doesn't help. Sure, it helps the consumers, and I've had so many comments about this. Like, yeah, shouldn't consumers know this? And the answer is yes, absolutely. The funny thing, though, and let me just say this: the American Cancer Society put alcohol on its list as the top three, one of the top three, and it fell in third place, cancer-causing risks of all the risks, right? And tobacco is first. Alcohol made that list at number 3. But that happened in 2020. What year are we in right now?
2024, if I'm correct. Is it 5? I don't even know.
We just moved to 5, but you get a pass for like the first few weeks, right? And so
it's a lot of drinking in 2020.
It's a lot of drinking, yeah. So, well, and exactly. I'm like, maybe it's not gonna, this is not an advisory that's gonna light on fire in 2020, considering all the other things that were happening then. But my point is that if this information existed 5 years ago, but just now, as an administration is about to exit and transition to a different administration, it just feels a little odd that all of a sudden we're deciding to make this information public and in such an inflammatory way. And the inflammatory part doesn't necessarily come from the Surgeon General, although if you break down a lot of the infographics that they have, there's some troubling things in those, in my opinion. But I think that there's a disconnect at a minimum, is what I'm going to say. And I just, it sort of bothered me at the time. And
when I open up Instagram or I open up almost anything, and for the most part, I'm looking for, if I go on, which I don't anymore, but when I used to go on Twitter, I was looking at sports, really, or movies. Sure. I'm always fed ads just like everyone else, and most of my ads right now are anti-drinking. I'm telling you, most of them. At my age, I get either old man sex pills advertised towards me, or I get, you should stop drinking. How do you stop drinking? Are you thinking about stopping drinking?
Here are ways.
What people don't understand about almost all press, and not all press, not journalism, but press, is that it's pitched or it's paid for in some way, shape, or form.
Thank you. That's the other part about this, is that, so I'm old school. I'm like very old school. And I feel like this particular advisory was taken by some of the, most reputable press sources that we have out there. And the headline was written totally to sell, totally to get those click-throughs. And the headlines, most of them are very, very misleading. There's a great story out by the Wall Street Journal that came out a couple of days ago that was less about the alcohol thing, although it's mentioned in there, but the way in which the headline was written and the photo that they chose to use as someone holding a beer. And I'm like, but the content that's in there says so much more rich information about why the young generations are starting to show up with more cancer. And alcohol has a very small percentage of that content, right? Like they talk about many other things and many other factors. And I'm like, that just bothers me, because it's not responsible media at that point. It's not responsible journalism.
You and I are biased for a number of reasons.
Sure.
I mean, you write about wine.
Yeah.
I make films about wine, but for me,
right.
I've always, and I truly mean what I'm about to say, I look at wine as a cultural, enriching, historical product that you're able to chart the movement of human civilization by where it's planted, what is planted, and what people are still drinking today. So for me, I look at this thing the way I would look at the way if you look at a city and the architecture is different in certain parts of the city, that'll tell you which groups of people move there at different times. And so I look at wine as a lot more than just a clickbait headline. And I've devoted my adult professional life to trying to prove this, especially through history. And to me, this thing was, yes, I'm biased. Yes, I like to drink wine. But like anything else, there is no light switch. Moderation is something for everything. And I've talked about this over and over on the podcast. If you are to just eat red meat every day for the rest of your life, red meat is the devil and will kill you. But if you have red meat every once in a while, you can get iron and you can do this and you can do that and you can look at it very differently. And I just think that this thing that is now every article is any amount of alcohol is bad for you. You touch it, you smell it, you talk about it. It's bad for you.
Yeah, it's bad for you. And let's be clear, it can be bad for you, right? Whether that's cancer or, to me, I mean, the larger concern is, I've had 2 very, very immediate people in my family die from alcoholism, like literally watch them slowly die. And so this is not me interested in calling to action that everyone should just start go drinking. But I totally agree with you that there's something at hand here that's very historical about drinking. And let's not use the word drink, but just wine or, I feel like culturally it's ingrained in our fabric. And, I'm not going to get religious here, but because everybody's from all sorts of different faiths, but I like to point out often that the first miracle that Jesus Christ ever conducted was turning water to wine. That's the first one. Yeah. And so I think, to me, if that's something that resonates with you, it's like, okay, there's something to that. And there's a reason for that. And actually, if you look into that story, it's a fascinating cultural reason that he chose to do that. And again, I'm not going to get all religious, but the cultural part behind it is what gives you context for the why. And I feel like, you've done a great job, like with Psalm 2, kind of showing that the context is what makes the sipping and enjoyment and savoring of a glass of wine actually even more impactful. Granted, not everyone's doing it that way, but it sure is a unique perspective to have, and to make this an all or nothing game it's not justifiable to me.
I'm afraid that this is the way all information is now. Everything is this way. It's like kids should not play football anymore at all. People should not eat this anymore. If you want, you can find out that eating any particular thing that you happen to love can kill you if you Google it. There is no, the problem is there is no, why don't we investigate this article? Because nobody wants to read that. Nobody wants to listen to a long drawn out, is this something I want to ponder? What they want to do is they want to go, oh, if I do this, I will die. Okay, well, I'll stop doing that. And then guess what? You're always being sold something. My favorite thing is that 6-7 weeks ago, I could not escape the fact that black spatulas and black kitchen utensils that were made from plastic, you had to throw them away immediately. Get them out of your kitchen. I was bombarded by this. I was on podcasts. I mean, it was everywhere that it is so deadly for you because the plastic that got recycled into these things, and especially the black ones, this happened X, Y, and Z. And then about 3 weeks ago, quietly comes out, the study it was based on was a mess and was not accurate. And unfortunately, It's probably like a small, tiny percentage of these things that have this cancerous. This is the problem. It's a very reactive. It's very got to jump on something. And when it comes to alcohol, yes, obviously, alcohol cannot be 100% good for you. It can't be 100% bad. And maybe it's skews bad. Maybe a glass of wine is fine. Maybe 6 glasses of wine is not. And guess what? We know that. I mean, this is the thing. So is there a group that is, what is going on with this pushing the anti-drinking agenda?
There's a really great guy in the industry who I'm sure the two of us are familiar with. His name's Rob McMillan, and he's the person who has written many years the Silicon Valley Bank kind of state of the industry, if you will, the wine industry. He's a banker and has kind of been that expert And he put something up on LinkedIn the other day, which is really what prompted me to be like, yeah, I want to say something about this. I'll give that link to make sure that we can put it in this show notes so people can check that out. But there's something that he dropped in that article that kind of just, I'd heard it before and I've always just kind of ignored it because I'm like, really, give me a break. And it's basically this idea of the neo-prohibition movement. I did not mention this in my Instagram post that I put out only because I try really hard not to get too political in my job. This is the first time where like wine and politics have come together for me. But in general, like I was a politics major in my younger life. I thought I was going to change the world and get into politics. And then thankfully I did not do that.
It's funny you didn't say wine and health. You said wine and politics. I think this is a very fascinating way you describe that.
Yeah. I don't think there's any, to me, again, this information was made public 5 years ago. So just think about all of that. So yeah, I think like to me, there's this movement, and it's this idea that with neo-prohibition, we're not interested in trying to eradicate all of alcohol and all production of alcohol in the way that we mistakenly did in the 1920s. And I say mistakenly for so many reasons: cultural, economic, agricultural, blah blah blah. But the idea behind the neo-prohibition movement is that we're going to curb the message. We're going to guide the message. We're going to own the message about alcohol and consumption of alcohol by trying to curb the consumption overall. And so the messaging that's getting out there is wellness, health related. I want to be careful that in saying all of this stuff, that's not necessarily a bad thing to say. And as we've been saying, alcohol can be bad for you. Please be sure that, there are many things that contribute to bad health, though. Like if you're drinking 2 bottles of wine a night, but also eating cheeseburgers and smoking cigarettes, like which is it? There are factors that are more than just the one item, not to mention the fact that genetically we are all composed of different predetermining factors for ourselves, right? So I just want to be clear that I'm not trying to say that it's wrong to say, hey, let's consider our health, particularly in January where everybody's like, oh, we're going to work out more and we're going to take this and be healthier and be healthier. That's what we always do in January. And I think Quitter's Day is on its way. I think it's January 12th. So we'll see how far everybody makes it. I am curious about this neo-prohibition movement. I've heard a lot of people talk about it. I've looked into it a little bit. I worry for my own sanity about going too far down that foxhole, if you will. But I think it's something that we should pay attention to because at the end of the day, the industry overall needs to try to gain back some of their voice in this message.
I want to really quick because I want to, at the risk of doing a little bit of whataboutism, which I know people don't want to hear, but we do need to compare alcohol to some other things that, people are whispering that should have warnings or be regulated, but I think it would be much harder to regulate. We'll get to that in one second. I just want to take one step back on this neo-prohibition thing.
Yeah.
So it is an interesting term. Some of the biggest players in this movement, they go back to the mid 1800s. And I've talked, if you listen to the podcast for a long time, we've talked quite a bit about prohibition, how it came about. And then some of the roots were founded in logic. There was some very bad stuff. People were drinking insane amounts. And we're not talking about jug wine or, Matthias and Rosé or Kathy Corrison's Napa Cab or something from Adelaide. We're talking about pretty much junk water. It was garbage. Mm-hmm. It was making people very sick. And the country was unhealthy, regardless of anything. The problem we know with alcohol is almost anybody can make it almost anywhere, out of almost anything. So making that an illegal product is impossible. But some of these groups, there's one in particular called Movendi. Have you heard of Movendi? Okay.
Yes.
So Movendi has this they go back to the 1850s. They're a temperance movement that has been around for a very long time. And their whole thing is there are no small artisans. There are no people connected to the land with alcohol. Everything is big alcohol. And it's weird, when you have these groups that make such sweeping statements, it's kind of like a dirty joke. There's truth to it somewhere. It may offend you, but there's truth. And if you look at, I'm just going to get on a soapbox here for 1 second. I know a lot of my listeners maybe even work for some of the large companies. I'm scared to name them, But, you know, what I would call the Illuminati of wine, beer, spirits, all of these groups that buy up the ones that get big enough, and they're everywhere.
Mm.
These groups are big alcohol. They are huge. They are deeply influencing what and how we drink. And so a group like Movendi, when they say something like that, they're not wrong. That when you go into a liquor store, you go into a corner store, you go into a grocery store, at what height you see certain products on a shelf and on what shelves they're on, that is a language. And somebody who works in that field knows. They can walk in and go, I know exactly why Coppola Cabernet is right here. And this, you know, Sancerre is impossible to find in the import section down at the bottom because, look, they fight for shelf space. This is a real thing.
Sure.
So this group Movendi, the amount of money that I'm just calling them out in particular, but there's many of these groups, they are spending a ton of money. And for anybody who wonders, like, how does, you know, Coca-Cola get to operate this way and have this giant distribution network? And how does this get to happen? They're lobbyists. They have lobbyists. They are lobbying. They are lobbying our lawmakers. And so I'm very conflicted about this. And why I wanted you to have on the podcast is not because I want to tell people what to do. It's because I want people to think, what should I do? Not that Jason says you should drink more or not drink at all, or you should drink certain producers, or you should drink only wines you can't afford, or any bullshit like that. It's more of just, let's have a conversation and let's figure out how to start having a conversation about what we should do. And so these companies are out there. And so anybody who's like, you know, I want to have a dry January. You know, dry January is a pitch. That whole term was pitched as an idea. Yeah. Do you want to jump in so bad?
I'm a journalist. I start getting pitches for dry January in October before sober October is over. So 100%. Let's keep this message clear. And I really want to be careful about getting too deep into this. But you know, the lobbies are the lobbies, and that, you know, you've from the gun lobby to the corn agriculture lobby to the shelf system in terms of the cereal aisle is the exact same thing. You know, we unfortunately or fortunately, it's the pros and cons. We live in a strong, very capitalistic country, and there are so many benefits and so many pros to that. So I'm not going to try to, again, get too political here, but we do it at the risk of not being able to truly protect ourselves from our own business dealings. Sure. like we're putting ourselves in harm's way. We have a lot more freedom in the United States, and that freedom, unfortunately, isn't so much something that we as consumers think we have. The freedom is with those who have the purse and the money to be able to say, we want to gain, right? Like, it's the same idea that, like, with social media, we just watched with my kids the other day, Social Dilemma, that like people think, oh, well, I'm the consumer that's consuming the social media. No, we're the client. Like, the advertising is what's running that whole show, not us.
That's right. You forget you're getting it for free, and there's a reason for that.
There's a reason you're getting it for free, right? And so this is a different model, but it's not a different strategy.
This is a perfect transition where, at the risk of doing what I said, a little bit of whataboutism, talk to me about something I found very fascinating that you had mentioned, was the percentage of cancer based on alcohol versus obesity. All right, so can we have without trying to say alcohol is fine, and this other thing is purely the devil, because I just want to start off with, look, when I was like 15 or 14, Totino's pizza rolls were one of my favorite things in the world. Okay.
Yeah.
I love Cheese Whiz. You know, like, I'm not against processed food, but I mean, you know, I grew up on this stuff. I like it.
Of course.
You know?
Of course. Yeah.
But can we talk about that without saying I want to illegalize everything?
I think so. I mean, again, so let's go back to 2020 when the top 3 items that were considered to be cancer risk contributors were listed by the American Cancer Society as tobacco, 40%, and it's been at the top for years. And then alcohol made it to number 3, but the second one was obesity. And to me, that's a little bit more concerning because if you think about it, tobacco has tobacco has serious regulation at this point, right? Following all of the lawsuits and everything that came about in the 1990s and warning labels, all the things.
Mhm.
But most importantly, tobacco is highly taxed on a federal level and on a state level.
I mean,
And
it's like
so is
$20 a pack in New York City. If you look at like what it costs, I think it might be
Really?
more. But I mean, if you look at what it costs to make a pack of cigarettes, it's like a nickel.
Yeah.
It's nothing.
Yeah.
It's like nothing.
Yeah, but a lot of that, of course, the tobacco companies aren't going to scrap their margin. So, if taxes are added to it, you can see how it backs into that price.
Sure.
Alcohol's the same. It's not taxed nearly as highly as tobacco is, but who's to say that it's not on the way with advisories like this, right? That's my concern. But what concerns me the most, and this is not whataboutism as much as pay attention to what's not being addressed. Absolutely, we should address tobacco. Absolutely, we should address alcohol. What's not being addressed? What is not taxed? Ultra-processed foods.
Mhm.
And again, I can help you guys link to some articles in the show notes, but like when you look at the numbers, there's a study that came out from Northeastern University recently, and it's saying that over 70% of the United States food system is considered ultra-processed. And that's a lot. It makes it hard. I'm a mom. You're a dad. I have kids. I care about what I'm putting in their body. And I feel like I'm a neurotic freak when I look at our pantries sometimes where I'm like, how did that get into I forgot you're not supposed to eat this. And, or more importantly, birthday parties and school lunches where it's like they're trading snacks and and you're like, the stuff that is able and in the hands of our kids and ourselves, right? Like, as you mentioned in our conversation earlier, if you're going to eat a Pringle, how can you eat just one? You're going to eat more.
No, it's impossible. I mean, there have been situations where I like, there's a bunch of like kettle chips or something on the table, and if you were to tell me you have a 1 in 5 chance of like a family member dying if you eat one more chip, I'd be like 1 in 5. All right, I need another chip.
I like those odds. Yeah,
but that's the insanity of how just tasty those are. They like scratch at the back of your brain.
Yeah.
You want another one. You want another Bugle. You want another Dorito.
Right.
I think.
But say, I'm sorry. But
no. I was just going to say that, trying to keep this within the wine context, it does seem a little bit of, I don't want to say crying wolf, because wine, alcohol, these are things that need moderation. They need to be understood. I don't know about regulated, but I think understood and educated on for sure. Right. Everyone's going to have a perspective. But when it comes to the easy choice for food, which quickly leads to obesity. I think a lot of the audience who listens to this podcast, very smart people. I'm serious. So they know this.
This is my problem. And again, without trying to be a whataboutist, but it's like if the numbers I put on the slides in my Instagram post were that 50% of Americans are obese. That's actually old data, but it's the most current data. And my last slide includes all the sources that I use because as a journalist, I think that's important. I think that data is also like official from 2020, 2021, but there are more recent statistics that show that 50% of Americans being obese, it's closer to like 2/3 of Americans. Okay. And then if our food system is dominated by 70% ultra processed foods, then we're dealing in our insurance and social healthcare system is hamstrung by people with cardiovascular disease and diabetes. Obesity contributes to 40% of cardiovascular disease, and type 2 diabetes, it's 80%. So to me, what's bothering me is that if we're going to try to make an announcement about things that are killing our population, and that announcement's going to come from our government, and that announcement's going to say, if only we could just put some labels on things to let people know that this is bad for, they can choose to eat it if they want to. They can choose to buy it and all of that, but it's bad for you. Why are we not addressing the bigger elephant in the room when, and alcohol, fine. If you want to put a label on it, fine. But at the same time, people aren't supposed to drink until they're 21 in America. But there's a huge population under the age of 21 that is getting introduced to a way of eating that they'll be stuck on forever. It's hard to break the cycle. So, and I'm not a nutritionist either. Like I do not want to be that person that's like running around screaming like, oh, get that processed food out of my kid's hand. He only eats carrots. Like my kids eat stuff. They drink stuff. But boy, do I like really try to come down on like, you can have that now, but it's in if you're going to a birthday party later, you're not going to have this, right? Like there's everything's in moderation in our family. So I think that's the part where I'm like, what is behind an advisory coming out like this when because is it the easiest thing to advise on right now? Did somebody suggest that that's more important to advise on than the number 2 cancer causing risk? Why the number 3 one? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but it was important to really address, at least for me.
A lot to unpack there. I only let my kids have 2 glasses of wine a night. That's my limit.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that you fall into this hole, or we fall into this hole of, should everything have labels? At what point is the insanity exactly what it is? Insane to go.
Yeah.
At a certain point, you should know that if you're drinking Monster energy drinks, sorry for anyone who loves those.
Yeah.
You're not, and you honestly think those are healthy? Like you're drinking, you're like, well, it has taurine, whatever the hell that is. Here's the thing. Those are not good for you. You should know. I don't have a single problem with people having a vice. I don't care. If somebody wants to put 100 Zins in their mouth and suck on them all day, or smoke a bunch of cigarettes or whatever, that's fine. I am for freedom, but I also feel like people should understand. So at what point do we regulate everything? Do we regulate nothing?
Right. That's the point is, okay, so fine, you want to put a warning on something, but you're not regulating it more, right? It's the same with food, that you can still produce that food, but it's not being regulated in terms of what can go into it. You're just at least telling people, hey, we put a bunch of junk in this, so good luck to you. I don't know. That's the part too, where I'm like, well, what's the point of this advisory?
Well, I will say this. If you're someone who has the fear that I have, once that label goes on a bottle, so imagine, I'm not talking about a bottle of Fireball. I'm not talking about something where you go to the corner store and you're like, I'm going to get something. What's the point of it? Drunk.
Yeah.
I would like to, for the one person in America who's sipping Fireball by a fire and they're just having 1 glass a night. I've never met you. Maybe you exist, but for the most part, Fireball's like, woo, let's get there quick. So I'm talking about a bottle of, let's say a bottle of really nice Pinot Noir from Santa Barbara. And you've got this family that's made it since the 70s, and you can romanticize all you want, but you taste it and it's delicious. And then it's got this label right there that says, according to Surgeon General, I mean, it already says on there that if you're pregnant, likely you should not do this. And I don't think anybody disagrees with that. I don't know that stops anybody, but you put a new label on there, and all of a sudden, how hard would it be to ever remove that label from it? I bet you that once that goes on, the getting that off again would be almost impossible. I mean, I don't think it would ever come off. Yeah. And I think what it is if you look back to the term neo-prohibitionists and all that stuff, which again, a lot of these companies, groups, people, organizations, they come from a good place, but they're not new. They've been trying. And so they can't make alcohol illegal. What they can do is make it a pariah. And they can make it this scarlet letter that if you're drinking, it's like smoking.
Right.
And then that's the beginning of the snowball, I think.
Yeah. Well, and again, this is where asking, and this is what I do for a living. So I'm sorry, but that's just how I'm predisposed. But I'm like, ask the right questions, right? Like, so let's say this, we're in the US and we're saying the top 3 cancer causing risks or cause, cancer. I want to be careful because you can't actually say alcohol caused this cancer, right? There are probably multiple contributing factors. Same with tobacco. It's highly likely that, tobacco may have contributed to this, but there are other things genetically that had to come together to make that cancer happen.
What would you have to do? Would you have to take a person and just put them in a room and feed them an amino acid all day and let them drink wine all day? Like, how would you prove this? You'd have nothing else in their body.
Can't.
I'm not saying, by the way, I am not under any circumstances saying that alcohol does not cause cancer. I mean,
Right.
That's not what I'm doing here, but
No. But here's what's something that is interesting to me. So I didn't put this out there because I looked it up a little bit later, but so cancer cases that are released in the United States, right? So I found that according to the available data, you have the United States with approximately 360.2 cases per 100,000 people. So 362 cases of cancer diagnoses a year. France is under that at 341.9, and Italy is at 292.6. For those that have never been to Europe, I know you may not have seen this, but like for those of you that have, like if you know someone that smokes, and the chances are, if you've been there, you've seen someone smoke because everybody smokes there, it feels like. The cigarette packs on there have gruesome photos of what can happen to your body if you smoke. And it's one of they do it as a deterrent, right? Naturally. Like they're like, please don't buy this and please don't smoke it because this is what your lungs are going to look like. And yet people are still smoking, right? Like it's still happening. And the same thing, they're drinking this. These are cultures in Europe where it's part of generational wine at the table kind of places, right? They're not shooting Fireball when they're sitting with grandpa, right? Like it's just ingrained in the culture, right?
I need to meet the grandpa that drinks Fireball.
There's your Fireball, yeah. But my point, maybe in Ireland, I don't know. Sorry, I love Ireland. But I'm just saying that, they have fun. My point is that, like, and still, if we know that in general, and I looked up numbers too, like technically the French and the Italians they're experiencing a decline in consumption, but America's decline is heavier. They're still enjoying wine and they're still enjoying their cultural heritage, right? And yet the cancer rates are higher in America. And what's different there is the food systems in Europe are much more highly regulated than they are in America. So again, the correlation and the things that are not being addressed are what concerns me, because the numbers speak for themselves to me. And I'm not a statistician. I'm not an economist. Like this is not I write. I'm a writer. But these things, when you start asking those questions and start saying, show me the data and show me the source of that data. If that's the case and we can look at all this data side by side and analyze it, then really there's something deeper involved. And that there's nothing that we are going to talk about today that's going to solve that. Unfortunately, I'm generally a hopeful person and I'm generally a glasses half full person, but we're in a demosclerosis, if you will, in terms of the ability for our democracy to actually work in favor of our health. Because right now it's not.
Well, when someone figures out how to monetize that, it will.
Well, it seems very backwards right now. And so that's the part where, and I should mention that term demosclerosis is not mine. That's actually a politics book I had to read in college. But I love that word because it really does define, this cardiovascular, blockage in our
we're
government.
About to have a president who does not drink. Trump famously does not drink at all.
Right.
So we'll see how this plays out. Obviously it's a moving target and we will continue to throw things at it and see and report on this. But I want to thank you before we get off. Well, I should ask you, give me a couple interesting bottles you've had recently. Let's just end this on something fascinating rather than just like doom scrolling through a podcast
I
here.
like it. Yeah. Okay. So so for the end of the year, I kind of went on a Cab Franc kick, and did a few different like Chinon and Samour like comparisons at
fantastic.
Yeah, at Christmas dinner. We did I'm in Texas, y'all. So we smoked a beef tenderloin. And that's the only way to go for us. And so it was a really great pairing for that. And, at the end, my husband was like, I mean, this is good, but I feel like I want something different. And so I just broke out JL Shaw Hermitage. I'm like, it's Christmas. Why not? Let's just do it.
Whoa, really?
Yes,
What vintage did you open up?
It was a 2013, but it,
Oh, you're like this old thing, it's no problem.
I'd been dying
It was
to
in the
try
closet, so I put it on.
Yeah.
It's no big deal.
No, it had been sitting there for a while, and I was like, why wait? What do we, why wait? We're all going to die, right? So let's just Let's do it with the
Wow,
shop.
I expected you to. I didn't know you were going to pull out. Okay, all right. You know, I'm a fan. You've seen my movies. You know, I'm a fan of Jean Louis.
I have. Yeah, and I mean, and we have listeners here that will appreciate it too. So, but that's the thing. It comes down to when you're with family and you're with friends and you're enjoying the people that you are spending time with. That's part of it. Is we brought prime beef. We spent money on the actual meal itself, and it was all whole foods, by the way. But why not put a great wine with it?
Well, I mean, the fact that you're rich also is nice. So, wine writers always are. So
yeah, you rake it in. Let me tell you.
Well, Jessica, I want to thank you so much. Really appreciate it. You can find Jessica's incredible writing in Food and Wine, 750 Daily, Forbes, Decanter, all over the place. You are somehow everywhere. So thank you for joining. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jason. I appreciate it.
I want to thank everybody for listening. We're going to put some of those links in the show notes for people that if they want some documentation on that conversation Jessica and I just had, they can go to those links. Also, I want to say, obviously, go to somtv.com. Your subscription is what fuels all of this. It means so much that you are subscribers. And, it lets us make more films, and we have more coming. So please go to somtv.com, subscribe, watch all the content, let us know what you think. And if you love this show, leave us a great review wherever you listen. I want to thank John Adams, our producer. I want to thank Jessica Dupuy for joining. And I want to thank you for listening. Everybody drink something nice, and sorry to hear you're going to die from it. Talk soon.